Night settled slowly over the old stone castle, wrapping the towers and walls in deep blue shadows. The torches along the corridors burned softly, their flames bending whenever the cold wind slipped through cracks in the ancient stones. Inside the castle, most people had already gone to sleep. Servants curled up near the kitchens. Guards tried to stay awake at their posts. But in the highest chamber, a young princess lay awake, staring at the ceiling as if it could answer the questions in her heart. Princess Elinor had spent many nights like this, unable to calm her thoughts. The blankets around her were warm, the bed large and comfortable, yet she felt no peace. She listened to the castle settling, wood groaning, heavy doors breathing, and far in the courtyard, a guard coughing into the cold night air. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the castle walls, a lonely horn echoed across the hills. It was the sound of a night patrol, nothing unusual, yet it sent a small shiver down her spine. She pulled the heavy wool cloak from the foot of her bed and wrapped it around herself. Her chamber was grand, with carved wooden beams, tall windows, and rich tapestries, but none of it made her feel safe. She walked barefoot to the frost-touched window and pushed the curtain aside. The kingdom below her stretched out like a dark sea. Tiny lanterns glowed in small clusters where villagers were finishing their chores or guarding their livestock. Smoke rose gently from chimneys. Dogs barked at shadows. The world looked peaceful from up here, but Elinor knew she was the only one awake with such heavy thoughts. People believed a princess lived the perfect life. They imagined golden crowns, beautiful gowns, and days filled with celebration. But Elinor knew a very different truth. Her life was a path decided by others, shaped by advisors who cared more about alliances and politics than her happiness. Every morning, she woke to lessons she did not choose. Every afternoon, she sat through long meetings where old men discussed her future as if she were made of ink and paper. And every night, she wondered what would happen next, what decision would be made for her, what rules she would be forced to follow. But tonight was worse. Tonight, she couldn't ignore the fear that twisted inside her. Tomorrow she would meet a stranger, someone she might be ordered to marry. A nobleman from a distant kingdom. She had seen a painting of him once, a stiff portrait with a forced smile, but paintings often lied. What if he was cruel? What if he wanted power more than kindness? What if marrying him meant leaving her family, her land, her freedom forever? She rested her forehead against the cold window glass and closed her eyes. She wished she could be like the villagers below, choosing their own partners, building their own homes, living simple lives. They might not have gold or fine clothes, but at least they owned their choices. A princess, however, was a piece on a chessboard, moved around when needed, sacrificed if necessary. A soft creak from her doorway made her freeze. The candle beside her flickered. She slowly turned her head toward the sound. The hallway outside her room was dark, except for the faint glow of a torch far down the corridor. A shadow moved across the crack beneath her door. Not fast, not slow, silent, like someone standing just outside, listening. Elinor felt her breath catch. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She didn't know if it was a servant checking on her, a guard making rounds, or someone who had been told to watch her. The castle was full of eyes. Every guard who bowed also reported to her father. Every maid who cleaned her room also whispered to the queen. Privacy was a rare thing for a princess. She stepped back from the door, careful not to make a sound. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her cloak. She was used to being watched, but something about tonight felt different, heavier, more unsettling. Perhaps it was because tomorrow would decide her entire future. Perhaps it was because she feared losing the little freedom she had left. Or perhaps it was because someone truly was standing on the other side of that door, listening for movement, waiting to see if she was awake. The shadow paused, then drifted away. Elinor listened until she could no longer hear footsteps. When she finally breathed again, it came out shaky and thin. She returned to her bed but did not lie down. She sat on the edge, staring at the wall, feeling a weight settle over her chest. She was born into privilege, yet she felt trapped. People outside the castle walls imagined that a princess's life was filled with joy, but if they stepped inside her world for even one night, they would understand the truth. A princess lived inside a golden cage, watched from every angle, controlled by every tradition, judged by every whisper. The narrator's voice deepens, drawing the listener closer. If anyone from the outside world could walk with Elinor through this one night, they would see that her beauty was not a gift, it was a responsibility. Her luxury was not comfort, it was duty. And her freedom was nothing more than an illusion. Elinor thought about the stranger she would meet tomorrow. His arrival was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of hope for the kingdom. But to her, it felt like the end of something precious, the small piece of herself she still controlled. She wondered if he knew she was afraid. She wondered if he cared. Her thoughts were interrupted again by a distant rumble of wind pushing against the castle walls. The torches outside her chamber flickered wildly, then settled. The castle felt alive tonight, as if it could sense her fear and breathe it in. She walked deeper into her chamber. Her footsteps were soft on the cold stone floor. She touched one of the long tapestries that hung on the wall, an image of a past queen, tall and proud, holding a crown in her hands. The queen looked powerful, but Elinor knew the truth behind that story too. That queen had been married at 14, given away to save the kingdom from war. Her strength was carved from sacrifice. Was this Elinor's future as well? Another small sound made her jump, a tapping at her window. Her heart raced again, but when she returned to the window, she saw only the long branches of a tree moving in the wind. Still, every noise tonight felt louder, sharper, as if the castle itself wanted to warn her that she was running out of time. She thought again of the shadow outside her door. Who had it been? A maid checking on her? A guard making sure she didn't try to escape? Stories whispered among the servants reminded her that not all visitors to the castle came with good intentions. Power attracted danger. And a princess like Elinor, unwed and valuable, was a target. She imagined someone standing just outside, listening to her every movement, making sure she obeyed the rules set for her. The idea tightened her throat. She sat back on her bed, pulling the cloak around her, trying to calm her breath. Hours seemed to pass, though perhaps it was only minutes. The fire in her chamber faded from orange to red, then to soft embers. The moon climbed higher, painting her floor with silver light. Elinor felt sleep tug at her, but she fought it. Sleep meant morning would come faster. Morning meant her fate would be sealed. She whispered into the quiet room, her voice barely a breath. I wish I could choose. No one answered. The castle remained silent, holding its secrets close. The narrator's voice returned softly, pulling the audience deeper into the story. Before anyone imagines the life of a medieval princess as a dream, they must stand with Elinor in this quiet chamber. They must feel her fear, her loneliness, her uncertainty. Only then will they understand that her life, wrapped in gold and beauty, was never as safe or free as it seemed. Outside her door, the shadow returned once more, slow, quiet, waiting. And the night crept on, heavy and full of secrets, as the princess realized that tomorrow would change her life forever. Elinor had worn a crown since she was a child, though not the golden one people imagined. Her first crown was made of rules. Her second was made of expectations. And both were heavier than any metal. When she was only 5 years old, the castle began shaping her into something the kingdom could use. Other girls her age played with wooden dolls, chased chickens in the yard, or splashed in the river. But Elinor's days were carefully planned. She woke before sunrise, dressed in stiff clothes, and sat at long tables with tutors who watched her like hawks. She was taught how to sit without moving, how to smile without showing fear, and how to speak politely even when she was angry. She practiced walking for hours, slow steps, straight back, chin up. If she tilted her head too low, a tutor tapped her shoulder with a long stick. If she laughed too loudly, she was told she sounded foolish. If she cried, the room fell silent, and the tutor reminded her that princesses were not allowed to break in front of others. "Elinor," they said again and again, "you belong to the kingdom, not to yourself." Those words shaped her childhood more than any story or lesson. Each time she heard them, a small piece of her freedom faded. Her lessons were endless. She learned foreign languages she never used, memorizing strange words until her head hurt. She studied maps of far kingdoms she might one day be sent to. She learned which fork to use at meals, which colors were proper for a princess, and what kind of husband would be acceptable for political peace. Not one lesson asked what she wanted. Not one person asked what made her happy. Outside the castle windows, she often saw village children laughing together. She would pause during her lessons, watching them chase each other through the fields. Their clothes were rough and their feet were muddy, but they looked free. When her tutor noticed her distraction, he closed the curtains and reminded her that a princess must stay focused. "Yes, my lady," he would say, "those children belong to themselves. But you have a duty. You belong to everyone." Elinor learned this truth early: the higher the tower, the smaller the world inside it. When she made mistakes, which every child naturally did, the punishments were never cruel but always cold. She was made to repeat lessons until her hands shook. She stood for long minutes with her back straight until her legs ached. She apologized to the tutor, even when the mistake was simply being tired or overwhelmed. If she cried, the tutor placed a cloth in her hand and said gently, "Princesses do not show their tears. Tears make people think we are weak." So she learned to cry silently, late at night, when no one could see. Her parents loved her, but their love was wrapped in duty. The king saw her as a future alliance. The queen saw her as a future bride. They hugged her gently, kissed her forehead, and told her she would be strong one day. But even they rarely asked if she was lonely. When Elinor tried to talk about her fears, her mother would stroke her hair and say, "The kingdom depends on us, my dear. You must learn to carry your crown without letting it fall." But Elinor already felt it slipping. As she grew older, her lessons became heavier. She learned how to behave at royal gatherings, even though she disliked the crowded halls filled with whispering nobles. She learned how to dance with practiced grace, even though the music made her feel isolated. She learned how to hide her emotions behind gentle smiles, even when her heart was full of confusion. Every night, she removed her jewelry and her dresses, but the invisible crown remained. It sat on her shoulders like a quiet weight, reminding her that her life was not her own. By the time she reached her teenage years, Elinor understood the truth that many never saw: a princess was not raised for happiness. She was raised for usefulness. The kingdom expected her to be perfect. To be beautiful enough to impress other rulers. To be polite enough to calm arguments. To be educated enough to speak to ambassadors. And eventually, to be obedient enough to marry someone chosen for her. She heard stories of other princesses, girls much younger than her, sent to faraway lands where no one spoke their language, married to men they barely knew, living lives where they were expected to produce heirs, not dreams. At night, Elinor would sit on her balcony and imagine what life might have been if she had been born outside the castle walls. She pictured herself running barefoot on the grass, eating simple bread, laughing without fear. She imagined speaking freely, choosing who she loved, choosing where she lived. But every morning, reality returned. The tutors came knocking. The lessons continued. The expectations grew. Sometimes, during formal dinners, she watched the nobles around her and wondered if they could see her true feelings. But all they saw was a perfect princess, calm, graceful, quiet. They did not see the girl inside who felt trapped. They did not see how hard she worked to keep her expression steady. They did not see how much she wanted to breathe without feeling watched. Her crown looked light, but it felt heavier than iron. And she wore it every day, even when no one saw it. She remembered one moment clearly, when she was 9 years old, asked to greet an important visitor. She practiced her greeting for hours, terrified of disappointing her parents. When the moment finally came, she bowed too quickly. The visitor laughed kindly, but her tutor whispered behind her, "A princess must never appear nervous." From that day on, she tried even harder to be perfect, even though perfection was impossible. Now, as she sat alone in her chamber at night, thinking about the stranger she might be forced to marry, she realized how long she had been preparing for this moment. Her entire childhood had been training, shaping her into someone who would accept decisions she did not choose. Even at a young age, she knew she belonged to the kingdom, not to herself. And the crown she wore, the invisible one, pressed down a little harder each passing day. From the moment Elinor grew into a young woman, people began to speak about her beauty. Servants whispered about her bright eyes. Nobles complimented her calm smile. Visitors bowed deeper when they saw her, as if her appearance alone proved she was special. But the truth was far more complicated. Beauty, for a medieval princess, was not a blessing. It was a price, a dangerous one. Elinor could feel it every day. Whenever she walked through the castle halls, guards followed her closely. Not one step was free. If she paused near a window to breathe fresh air, a guard asked if she needed anything. If she tried to walk in the garden, 2 more guards trailed behind, watching every shadow. Even when she visited the chapel to pray, people stared at her more than the altar. Her beauty, praised by everyone, had become a cage with no doors. She could not walk outside the castle walls. She could not ride her horse in the fields. She could not join the village festivals she sometimes heard from her window. Every time she asked for more freedom, her father reminded her of the truth. "Elinor, you are admired. And admired people must be protected." But it did not feel like protection. It felt like possession. Even her words were watched. A princess could not speak too boldly or argue with nobles. She could not voice her fear or criticize decisions. Every sentence had a consequence, and every mistake might create rumors. Even a simple misunderstanding could travel across kingdoms and turn into a political problem. So she stayed quiet. So she smiled politely. So she swallowed her thoughts. One afternoon, the castle welcomed visiting nobles from a nearby land. They were guests of honor, important for peace talks, and the royal court gathered to greet them. Elinor stood beside her parents, wearing a gown made of silver-blue fabric that shimmered in the torchlight. She felt the eyes of the nobles on her, studying her, judging her, whispering about her future. Some nobles looked at her with gentle admiration, bowing with respect. But others stared with a kind of hunger she had learned to recognize. A princess with beauty and a possible marriage contract was not a person to them. She was a prize. Elinor lowered her gaze as one nobleman stepped forward. He was older than her father, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. He bowed deeply, but the way he held her hand lingered too long. The queen politely stepped between them, but Elinor felt her stomach twist. Later, she heard whispers from the maids, that the same nobleman had asked about her dowry, her education, even her habits. He had not asked about her dreams or feelings, only the things that made her valuable to a political deal. Beauty, in the medieval world, did not protect a princess. It exposed her. Princesses were often targets. For alliances that stole their childhood. For forced marriages that ignored their wishes. For kidnapping plots created by enemies who wanted power. For poison and betrayal by those who wished to control the throne. For spying from servants paid by rival kingdoms. Elinor understood this well. Every compliment came with a shadow. Every smile hid a motive. Every kindness felt like a test. Even the guards who protected her were not fully comforting. Some were loyal. Others, she suspected, reported her every move to advisors. A princess was watched more than she was loved. One cold night, unable to sleep, Elinor walked quietly toward the balcony at the end of the hall. The moonlight covered the stones with a pale glow, and the castle was silent except for the soft steps of 2 guards standing near the stairs. She stayed hidden behind a pillar, not planning to eavesdrop, but their voices drifted toward her. "Did you hear what the commander said?" one guard whispered. "No," the other replied. "What now?" "There might be an attack. Spies say a rival kingdom is planning something. They want leverage. They want someone important." Elinor felt her heart stop for a moment. She pressed her back against the wall, staying silent. "Do they mean the king?" the guard asked. "No. Not the king," the first guard muttered. "The princess." Elinor's breath caught in her throat. The guard continued, voice low and tense. "They say taking her would be enough to break our kingdom's strength. She is young, she is admired, she is the key to alliances. They won't kill her. They want to use her." The words hit her like cold water. All her life, she had been told she was protected. That the guards were there for her safety. That her beauty made her precious. But now she understood something else. She was not just protected. She was hunted. She suddenly saw the truth behind the castle's walls. The guards didn't follow her because she was special. They followed her because she was a target. Enemies didn't want the king. They wanted what the king valued most, her. Her beauty wasn't a shield. It was a magnet for danger. She leaned carefully away from the pillar, trying to breathe without making a sound. In her mind, the whispers of the guards mixed with the stories she had heard throughout her childhood: princesses stolen during festivals, royal daughters poisoned by servants, young brides sent away to foreign lands who never returned home again. She had always thought those were faraway stories, meant to teach caution. But they were not stories. They were warnings. As she walked back to her room, each step felt heavier. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, her soft face, her quiet eyes, her long hair that everyone praised. For the first time, she didn't see beauty. She saw risk. She saw a reason for enemies to attack. She saw the danger she carried simply by being herself. When she returned to her chamber, she shut the door quietly, her hands trembling. She realized something she had never dared to think before. She was not protected by the castle. She was trapped inside it. And the world outside, full of shadows, plots, and hungry ambitions, was not after the throne. It was after her. Morning sunlight touched the castle towers, but inside Princess Elinor's chamber, the light felt cold. She sat at the edge of her bed, her hands tightly folded in her lap. A thin breeze entered through the window, carrying the sound of distant bells. Usually, she loved mornings. But today, the bells felt like warning signs. Today was the day her father would decide her future. A servant knocked softly on the door. "Princess, the council is waiting." Elinor stood, though her legs felt weak. She tied her cloak around her shoulders and walked through the long stone corridor. Her steps echoed. Each step felt heavier than the crown she was forced to wear during ceremonies. As she approached the council room, she heard voices, deep, serious, and tense. "The marriage must happen before winter," one advisor said. "If she refuses," another argued, "the king of Greythorn will not accept it. Their army is already waiting near the border." Elinor stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is about me," she thought. "This is my life, but I have no voice in it." A guard opened the door for her. She stepped inside. Her father, King Rowan, sat at the far end of the long wooden table. He looked tired, older than she remembered. Beside him stood 3 advisors dressed in heavy robes. Their faces were unreadable. "Elinor," the king said, "come sit." She sat, folding her hands in her lap again. The room felt colder than winter. King Rowan cleared his throat. He avoided her eyes, something he rarely did. That alone scared her more than anything. "Elinor," he began, "a proposal has been made for your hand." She swallowed. "From whom, father?" "The King of Greythorn," one advisor answered sharply. "A strong alliance. One that will protect our kingdom." Another added, "The marriage is necessary, princess. Wars have begun for less." Elinor kept her voice calm, though inside her chest, panic grew like fire. "But I do not know him," she whispered. The advisor shook his head. "Most princesses do not know their husbands until the wedding day. It is how kingdoms survive." Survive. That word repeated in her mind like a drum. Survive. 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 It felt cruel that her own survival meant giving up everything that made her who she was. King Rowan finally looked at her. His eyes were full of sorrow. "This is not easy for me," he said softly. "But the kingdom is weak. Our enemies watch us. If you do not marry him, we may face war." Elinor felt her stomach twist. "So? I have no choice?" she asked. The silence that followed was her answer. When the meeting ended, Elinor walked alone through the castle garden. The flowers were alive with color, red roses, white lilies, small purple wildflowers that grew near the old stone wall. But she did not see beauty. Her mind was too full of shadows. She imagined what her life would become. She imagined traveling far away, to a kingdom she had never visited. The language would be different. The customs would be strange. She would be surrounded by new rules she did not understand. She imagined living in a castle where every face was unfamiliar. A place where her name meant nothing. A place where she was not a daughter, not a friend, not even Elinor, but simply the queen they forced into the role. Her identity would vanish. Her home would vanish. Her freedom, already small, would disappear completely. Her throat tightened with fear. She sat near the fountain, watching water fall in soft patterns. She remembered her childhood, running in the fields before she understood the meaning of duty, laughing with servants who treated her like a normal child. Back then, she believed her future would be filled with hope. That night, she could not sleep. She tossed and turned, listening to every small sound. The castle creaked in the cold. Somewhere, a guard coughed. Outside her window, an owl hooted, its cry long and haunting. She wrapped her cloak around her tightly and walked to the window. The moon looked silver, glowing over the rooftops. Her thoughts swirled until her head hurt. She imagined the man she would be forced to marry. What kind of person was he? Was he kind? Was he cruel? Would he treat her with respect, or treat her as property? Some princesses lived peaceful married lives. Some lived in fear every day. Elinor prayed she would not become one of the unlucky ones. As she stood near the window, she heard footsteps outside her chamber. 2 soldiers were whispering. She pressed her ear to the wooden door. "The marriage will happen soon," one guard murmured. "The kingdom cannot afford delay." "And the man she's marrying, he is known for his temper," the other whispered. Elinor froze. Her heart pounded. Her breath became shallow. A temper. A cruel man. A stranger with power over her life. The guards continued, unaware she was listening. "They say he controls his kingdom through fear. People obey because they are afraid of what will happen if they don't. And now our princess must go live with him. Poor girl. Poor girl." Those 2 words stabbed her more deeply than any sword. Now, that hope felt like a dream someone had stolen. The story pauses for a quiet moment, allowing the narrator to guide the audience with soft, serious words. In medieval times, a princess's marriage was not for love. Not for happiness. Not for her future. It was for power. It was for alliances. It was for survival. Once married, a princess lost her identity. Her loyalty shifted to her husband's land. Her freedom became smaller than a candle flame. Her voice became softer than a whisper. Princess Elinor knew this. And yet, knowing did not lessen her fear. The letter arrives. The next morning, the entire castle was busy preparing. Servants hurried through the halls carrying trays, cloth, scrolls, and boxes. Guards polished their armor. The kitchen fires burned bright. Elinor knew something was wrong. The castle had never been this active so early. Then she saw him, Sir Aldrich, the king's trusted messenger, walking toward her with a sealed letter in his hand. His steps were fast, his face tense. "Elinor," he said, bowing slightly, "this letter has arrived for you." She took the letter with trembling fingers. The seal was unfamiliar, dark red wax shaped like a wolf's head. Her stomach dropped. She carefully broke the seal and opened the letter. Her eyes moved across the words slowly. Each word felt like a punch to her heart. "I will arrive earlier than expected. Prepare yourself. King Alastair of Greythorn." Elinor read the line again. Earlier. He was coming early. She felt faint. The room spun. She had thought she had weeks, maybe months, to breathe, to think, to hope something would change. But now she had days. Maybe only hours. She felt as though the floor beneath her had cracked, forcing her to fight for balance. She gripped the edge of a table to keep from falling. Sir Aldrich stepped forward. "Princess, are you well?" She nodded slowly, though tears filled her eyes. "Yes. I am fine." But she was not fine. She was terrified. By late afternoon, the news had spread through the castle. Maids arranged her gowns. Advisors discussed wedding dates. Guards practiced their drills. Cooks planned feasts. Priests prepared their blessing rituals. Everyone worked with excitement. Everyone except Elinor. She walked through the castle like a ghost, silent, pale, lost. Every corner, every room reminded her of a life she would soon leave behind forever. In the sewing room, maids held up dresses embroidered with gold thread. "This one will make you shine, princess," one said cheerfully. When night came, the castle quieted. But Elinor's heart did not. She sat by the window again, looking at the moon. Her hands shook. Her breath was unsteady. She felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She whispered to the night, "What will become of me?" The stars did not answer. They simply watched. She imagined herself in Greythorn, surrounded by strangers, obeying rules she did not understand. She imagined never returning to her home again. She imagined waking up in a room that did not feel like hers. She imagined fading away slowly, becoming someone she did not recognize. A tear fell from her eye. Then another. And another. She thought of her childhood again, running barefoot on the grass, laughing with her lady-in-waiting, listening to her mother tell stories of brave princesses who fought for their people. But the truth was different. Princesses did not choose their battles. They did not choose their lives. They did not choose their husbands. Princesses were chosen. Elinor felt the unfairness burn inside her like fire. She pressed her hands to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. "I do not want this," she whispered. "I do not want this life." But no matter how loudly she cried inside her heart, the world outside did not change. The marriage would happen. The stranger would arrive. Her life would be handed over. She felt the truth settle into her bones. She was trapped. Just before dawn, a servant knocked on her door. "Princess," she said nervously, "a second letter has arrived." Elinor felt fear grip her again. She took the letter with shaking hands. It was short. I will reach your kingdom tomorrow. Tomorrow. Her breath stopped. Tomorrow. Her world collapsed. Princess Elinor lowered the letter slowly. The candle beside her flickered, as if frightened by the news. Her heart felt heavy, trembling inside her chest. She knew now that the life she once dreamed of had slipped far beyond her reach. And tomorrow, a man she had never met would come to claim her future. Night settled over the castle like a dark blanket, thick and heavy. The halls were silent, the torches were dim, and most of the servants were already asleep. But Princess Elinor lay awake, her eyes open, her heart beating too fast for comfort. She turned in her bed again and again, but sleep would not come. Her mind was filled with fear, a marriage she did not want, a future she did not choose, a life where every decision had already been made for her. The early arrival of her future husband had shaken her more than she expected. She had always known she would marry for duty, not love, but she never imagined it would feel like a cage tightening around her. A long, silent walk. Finally, unable to bear the stillness of her bedchamber, Elinor slipped out from under her blankets. Her bare feet touched the cold stone floor, sending a shiver up her spine. She wrapped a thin cloak around herself and opened the door as quietly as she could. The corridor outside was dark, lit only by a few dying torches. Shadows stretched along the walls like thin fingers. The castle, which seemed loud and crowded during the day, now felt like a place of ghosts and secrets. Elinor walked slowly, her steps soft, almost soundless. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to move, she had to breathe, had to think. As she walked, a dangerous idea rose in her mind. What if I ran away? The thought shocked her at first. A princess running away from her own kingdom? It sounded impossible. Wild. Foolish. But the more she thought about it, the more it echoed inside her. What if freedom is outside these walls? What if my only chance to live my own life is to run? But she knew the truth. A princess alone was not a traveler, she was a target. Outside the castle walls, the world was harsh and cruel. Thieves roamed the forests waiting for easy prey. Bandits attacked travelers on lonely roads. Soldiers from rival kingdoms would happily kidnap her for ransom. Even wolves, desperate in winter, hunted near human settlements. If she stepped into the night alone, she might not survive until morning. And even if she managed to run far, if she escaped the dangers of the world, her own kingdom would chase her. A runaway princess was not a missing person, she was a political disaster. Someone like her had no place to hide. The world outside suddenly felt bigger, colder, and far more frightening than the future waiting for her. Her thoughts grew too heavy, so she turned toward one of the only places where she ever found peace, the old library. It was a forgotten corner of the castle, hardly visited except by a few scholars and servants. The door creaked softly when she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust, ink, and ancient memories. Books lined the tall stone walls, their leather covers worn with age. Here, no guards watched her. No tutors scolded her. No expectations followed her. The library was the only place in the castle where she could breathe without feeling controlled. She walked between the tall shelves until she found a small window seat hidden behind a curtain. She sat down, pulled her knees to her chest, and let her sadness rise. Tears slipped from her eyes silently, falling onto her cloak. For the first time since she learned of her marriage, she allowed herself to cry freely. Not like a princess. Not like someone trained to hide weakness. But like a young woman who was afraid of losing herself. Her tears made the dim room feel even quieter. The whole world seemed heartless and far away. Elinor wiped her eyes quickly when she heard a faint sound, a step, soft but close. Her heart jumped. Guards rarely came here. Servants were usually asleep. Who could be wandering the castle at this hour? Then she saw a familiar figure appear between the shelves, an old woman, carrying a small lantern. "Elinor," the woman whispered. It was Mara, one of the oldest servants in the castle, a woman who had served Elinor's grandmother long before she was born. Mara's back was bent with age, her hair white as winter frost, but her eyes were warm and sharp. The old woman walked closer and sat beside Elinor without asking any questions. "You could not sleep," she said gently. Elinor shook her head. I needed to think. "And cry," Mara added softly. Elinor opened her mouth to deny it, but the old woman raised a hand. "There is no shame in tears. Not for those who carry heavy burdens." Something in her voice made Elinor's chest ache. She looked down at her hands. "I do not know what to do," she whispered. "I feel trapped. Like the castle is closing around me." Mara touched her shoulder with a light, comforting hand. "It is fear," she said. "And fear grows quickly when a young heart is taken by surprise." Elinor leaned her head against the cold stone wall. "I thought princes and princesses were meant to be strong." "They are," Mara said. "But strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is living despite fear." Stories of other princesses. Mara looked around the ancient library, her eyes full of memories. "In my lifetime," she said slowly, "I have seen many princesses in this castle. Some were brave. Some were gentle. Some fought. Some surrendered." Elinor listened with all her heart. "I saw a princess who married a man she hated," Mara continued. "She smiled during her wedding, but she cried every night for years." Elinor felt a chill run down her arms. "I saw another princess who ran away. She disguised herself and fled in the middle of winter." Elinor lifted her head suddenly. "What happened to her?" "No one knows," Mara replied. "Some say she reached another kingdom. Some say she died in the snow. Some say she lived quietly, far from politics, and was finally free." Elinor swallowed hard. The mystery felt both terrifying and hopeful. "No one knows," Mara replied. "Some say she reached another kingdom. Some say she died in the snow. Some say she lived quietly, far from politics, and was finally free." Elinor swallowed hard. The mystery felt both terrifying and hopeful. "And then," Mara said, "there was a princess who accepted her marriage. She became a strong queen. She learned to control her fate from the inside, and her husband eventually respected her wisdom." Elinor blinked. "So, some found strength?" "Yes," Mara smiled sadly. "And some lost hope." Silence filled the library again. Her heart battles her fate. Elinor's thoughts swirled like storm winds. She imagined herself running away, hiding her identity, traveling through forests, changing her life completely. She imagined living a simple life, working with her hands, speaking freely, choosing her own path. But she also imagined cold nights, danger, hunger, being hunted like a lost treasure. She imagined staying, marrying a man she did not know, living in another land, obeying rules she never chose. Both paths looked frightening. Both paths looked painful. The narrator seems to whisper through the shadows of the room. This is the turning point of her story. Will she bow to fate? Or try to break it? Elinor took a deep breath. Her tears had dried, but her heart was still heavy. "Mara," she asked quietly, "what should I do?" The old woman looked at her with wise, tired eyes. "My princess," she whispered, "I cannot choose for you. But I can tell you one truth." She leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. "Freedom always has a price. And so does duty. Only you can decide which price you are willing to pay." Elinor closed her eyes. The night felt darker. The silence felt heavier. But her heart felt awake, painfully awake. The knight's question. Mara helped her stand, brushed the tears from her cheeks, and guided her out of the library. "Rest, child," she said. "Tomorrow will bring answers, or more questions." Elinor walked back through the long corridors, but everything felt different. Every torch seemed to flicker with warning. Every shadow seemed to wait for her decision. She returned to her room. She stood at her window and looked out at the world she feared and desired at the same time. In her chest, two voices battled. Accept your fate. Or challenge it. The night hid her answer. But dawn was coming, and with it, her choice. Dawn slowly touched the sky, painting it with soft gold and pale pink. The birds began to sing outside the castle walls, their voices rising gently through the cool morning air. The kingdom was waking again. People were opening their doors, stretching their arms, and stepping into a new day. But inside the high stone tower, one window remained open to the early wind, and one young princess stood quietly before it. Princess Elinor's eyes were tired from a sleepless night, but something inside her had changed. Her fear had not disappeared, and her future was still uncertain, yet the world looked different now. Clearer. Sharper. More honest than ever before. She stood very still, watching the morning unfold, wondering why she had never noticed its beauty until today. From her high window, she saw the kingdom living its simple but free life. Farmers made their way toward the fields, carrying tools over their shoulders. Their clothes were plain and worn, and their work would surely be hard, yet they walked with steady steps. They were not being watched. They were not being judged. They chose where to walk, when to work, and how to live. That freedom, small and ordinary, struck Elinor with surprising force. Children ran down the narrow streets, laughing loudly as they chased each other. Their joy echoed across the stone walls. No one scolded them for being too loud, or too wild, or too imperfect. No guard followed their every step. No tutor waited with books. They lived with simple happiness, free from the heavy weight of expectations. Traders lifted the wooden shutters of their market stalls and arranged baskets filled with fruit, cloth, and pottery. They greeted each other with cheerful voices, calling to early customers. Their hands were rough from years of work, but their choices were their own. They were not royalty, and their lives were not comfortable, yet they owned something priceless, freedom to decide their own fate. Elinor felt her breath catch in her throat. She had grown up believing she was fortunate. She had been told a princess had everything anyone could ever want. Fine dresses, warm rooms, loyal guards, endless respect. But now she saw clearly how empty those things were without the freedom to live as she wished. Her heart tightened as she whispered to herself, "They look free." And she realized she had never been able to say the same about her own life. She turned slowly from the window and looked at her room as if seeing it for the first time. Everything was beautiful. Silk curtains, carved furniture, polished floors, shelves of books, rare paintings, shining lamps. But instead of comfort, she saw nothing but a carefully decorated cage. Every object felt like a lock. Every rule felt like a chain. From the day she learned to walk, her path had been chosen for her. From the day she learned to speak, her voice had been measured and corrected. From the day she understood danger, she had been told to fear it. Every lesson, gesture, and rule had been designed to make her useful to the kingdom. She was trained to smile perfectly, to stand like a statue, to walk with grace, to speak with caution. She was raised not to be herself, but to be an idea, a tool for alliances, a symbol for loyalty, a daughter who could be traded for peace. Her future marriage, arranged without her consent, was only the final piece of the life she could not escape. There was a soft knock on her door. The sound was gentle, almost careful. "Elinor," came a familiar voice. It was Mara, the old servant who had comforted her the night before. Elinor opened the door, and Mara stepped inside with a small tray of warm tea. "You look tired," the woman said kindly. "I could not sleep," Elinor answered, her voice quiet. "My mind would not rest." Mara put the tray down and stood beside her. "And now? How do you feel?" "I feel," Elinor paused. She did not know what the right word was. "I feel like I finally see my life clearly." She walked back to the window, and Mara followed her gaze. The kingdom was fully awake now, buzzing with life and energy. People moved with purpose, with freedom, with choices. "So," Mara whispered, "you have found your truth?" Elinor's voice trembled. "I thought being a princess was a gift. But now I see it is just a responsibility without choice." Mara placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Royal life has always been like this. Princesses live in comfort, but they are locked inside invisible walls." Elinor touched the small silver crown resting on her table. It looked delicate, almost fragile. But when she lifted it onto her head, the weight felt heavy, almost unbearable. Every part of the crown carried the pressure of her kingdom, the hopes of her people, the fear of war, the expectations of nobles, the traditions of her ancestors. It was a symbol of honor, yes, but also a reminder that her life was never really her own. She slowly set the crown back down. Outside her window, the morning grew brighter. More townspeople stepped into the day. The world seemed so full of life and movement, while she felt trapped in silence. For a moment, she imagined herself walking among them wearing simple clothes and blending into the crowd. She imagined choosing her own path, making her own mistakes, laughing without fear of judgment. She imagined a life where she was not watched, measured, or used for political gain. A life where she belonged to herself. A quiet whisper escaped her lips, "Perhaps it is better to be simple, and free." Mara closed her eyes as if those words broke her heart. "Many princesses have wished for the same," she said softly. "Some only whispered it in the dark. Some cried it into their pillows. But very few ever said it aloud." Elinor felt a tear run down her cheek. She had never felt so close to the truth. Outside, the world continued unaffected by her fears. Farmers worked. Children laughed. Traders shouted their morning greetings. Life moved forward, simple and imperfect and beautifully free. The narrator's voice comes like a soft breath across the scene, gentle but deeply honest. A princess lived in a castle, but she did not live a fairy tale. Her life was made of expectations she never chose, duties she never asked for, and dangers she never invited. She was admired but not free. Protected but not safe. Surrounded by beauty but unable to touch the simplest joys of life. Elinor stood straighter as the sun warmed her face. Her heartbeat steadied. For the first time, she felt the truth settle inside her. She knew she had a choice to make, though she did not yet know which path she would take. She could accept her fate and become the princess everyone expected her to be. Or she could challenge the destiny carved for her and seek a life that belonged to her alone. The morning did not give her an answer. No voice whispered the solution. But she finally understood her reality. She bowed her head and repeated her whisper, this time stronger, filled with truth, better to be simple, and free. They were not just words. They were a truth carved into her heart, a truth many princesses had felt before her, a truth that revealed the final message of her story. Being a medieval princess was never a fairy tale. It was a life filled with shadows behind golden curtains, a life of fear, duty, danger, and sacrifice. A life far harder than anyone imagined. A life many would never survive. And as the morning sun filled her chamber, Princess Elinor stood quietly, holding her truth like a fragile spark of hope, a small light in a world that had always been dark around her.